Hello everyone. Today I'm going to explain to you chapter 1 of Morgan Housel's book, The Psychology of Money. I did the introduction yesterday. You can find it on the channel. So chapter 1 is called Nobody's Crazy. Nice title. The reason it's called Nobody's Crazy is because everybody seems to do crazy things with money, but that doesn't make them crazy. And why does what one person does with money seem crazy to another person if there are rules and fixed ways of handling money properly? Because of psychology. Remember, this is the psychology of money. So what people do with money in terms of the decisions they make, there's lots of studies that have looked into this, is massively influenced by what they experience, primarily up to the age of about 25. So people who lived through the Great Depression in America, they have very, very different money habits generally to people who didn't live through that. People who lived through high inflation think about money differently from people who didn't live through high inflation or live through stable prices. So Australia, which has apparently not had a inflation for about 30 years, they think about money very, very differently from the average American or the average, millennial might do with the UK going through lots of inflation right now. You can read about the rules, you can read about the laws, you can read about the principles of finance, says Morgan Housel, but that's nothing compared to actually living through fear, living through uncertainty, coming home and wondering how you're going to put food on the table or you're going to keep the house. That is what shapes how you think about money and how you behave about money, which to other people might seem crazy, because one of the things he says in there is what we know, our experience, our individual experiences, is an infinitesimally small amount of information. But to us, it's 80% of everything we know and believe and rely upon in our interactions with money. He talks about a guy, Bill Gross, who made, I imagine, hundreds of millions in the bond market. But 10 years, his parents, not 10 years earlier, sorry, his parents saw saw bonds as money incinerating machines, whereas he saw them as money generating machines, and that's because he didn't live through massive inflation. So that's one thing as well. Finance itself, the principles of finance, the idea of a retirement he talks about was very, very interesting. The principles of finance as we currently now know them, social security, retirement, saving, investing, that's only really been around for about 60 years. Not much time at all. Not much time at all. Whereas money has been around since 600 BC, so 2,600 years. Odd, something like that, 2,622 years. Money's been around for that long, and the way it's meant to be dealt with now has only been around for about 50 years, let's say 40, 50, 60 years. And so that's why most of us are amateurs at it. Most of us are crap. Dogs have been domesticated for 10,000 years. This is all from the book. This isn't me coming up with really smart stuff. Dogs have been around for 10,000 years, domesticated, but they still have a lot of the characteristics of their ancestors before domestication, wolves generally. So your decisions about money, we're all amateurs. Don't worry if you're not great at saving or investing, or you're getting into debt at the moment. Debt instruments have only been around since the GI Bill after the Second World War. So a lot of people get into debt now because it's to get into debt, but before the Second World War, it was very difficult to get into debt. So we're a species, we're a race, we're human beings are trying to deal with something which is very, very new. And that's why most of us are very bad at money, and that's why most of us have different ideas about money, which we firmly believe to be the truth. And it all comes down to your individual experience, your individual psychology. The next chapter, by the way, is about how Bill Gates got rich. I've read the book before, so I know this is very, very interesting, but it might surprise you. And how people view things like Bill Gates' success has a lot to do with the culture they grew up in. Maybe if you come from a culture, oh, anybody can be just as successful, you just got to work hard, you just got to do this. Other people don't think that's the case. One of the other interesting things in this chapter is how people view working conditions and how people view retirement. So he mentions there was a lot of criticism about the working conditions of some Taiwanese electronics manufacturer, and there was letters in the Wall Street Journal saying, oh, this is terrible, etc., etc. Then somebody else sent in a letter, and he said, look, the conditions in these factories, you call them sweatshops, they're not great, but my aunt worked there, and I'd rather she was exploited by a factory for a few dollars than what she used to do, which was be a prostitute, so be exploited by men, have her body exploited for a few pennies. So you have to look at the scale you're comparing everything to. Now, this is not to say that people shouldn't, if they want to, aspire to be on a higher scale, but you have to consider people's ideas about money are to do with their individual experience. All right. Retirement. Now, everybody says they want a happy retirement. Everybody's worried about retirement and everything, but until the 80s, retirement checks were not above, adjusted for inflation, about $1,000. This is talking about the States, a month. You know, people before the Second World War didn't used to retire. You just work until you die. So the whole idea of, oh, we deserve a retirement, I want to retire, this and that, that's a brand new thing as well. And not everybody does retire. So retirement's not to do with money. Some people don't retire because they can't afford to. But that doesn't mean just because you can afford to, you have to retire. There are plenty of people with tons of money who don't retire. I'm going to give you an example. Rupert Murdoch, he's still working. He's got tons of money. Okay, yeah, but he's in business. He's business-minded. All he cares about is money. That's what his life's about. Okay, let's look at people outside. Think about a lot of musicians who, Charlie Parker, the drummer from the Rolling Stones. He was still a drummer. Mick Jagger's still going. They've got all the money in the world. It's not about money. Retirement is an idea that's been given to us over the last few generations that, for some reason, we all believe is a right. For a lot of immigrants who've got relatives in other countries, they never retire. They just work until they drop. Do they have dreadful lives? No, a lot of them are happy. Do they have the same wealth that people in Western countries have? Not necessarily. But it doesn't mean that retirement is, a fact of life that must happen. Imagine if you were doing something that you enjoyed so much that you just kept doing it regardless of money. And hopefully by that time you don't have to do it for money. By that time, I mean by the time you're in your 60s. So do you think, for example, Stephen King would still be writing even if it hadn't made him millions and millions, hundreds of millions? I think he would, because it's what he likes doing. So that's not to do with the book. That's just another idea. The book is about money. So I've told you what's in that chapter. Hope you enjoyed that. And I'll be looking tomorrow on this channel at how Bill Gates got rich, according to the book The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel.